Okay, hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming out here, and thank you to the Seattle Design Festival for having us. Um, as mentioned before, there's a lot of free books around the area, especially for anyone back there. All these books are free. We'll get more into what the books actually are throughout this talk and sort of find different ways of entry to understand what they are. Um, yeah, you want to hit next? So my name is Rishi, and I'm here joined with Sarah and Maria. And we're here to talk about invisible architecture to you guys. And so I want to start out with sort of like what brings us together. It's this idea of fitted at the University of Washington. Fitted currently is about 40 members at the University of Washington, but it's kind of hard to understand what exactly it is since its work spans so many different disciplines. So in order to start, I think it might be helpful to go backwards into where it all began. Fitted began in 2020 as literally just a simple Instagram account called fitted.uw. It was started by one student at the University of Washington called Dylan, or not called Dylan, named Dylan. And he found it hard to just find community and make friends in University of Washington. And he was pretty into fashion, so he just had the idea of walking up to people and taking pictures of their outfits and posting it on the Instagram. And he thought it was a cool, fun little practice. And eventually it trickled over into a few hundred followers. And it started to get a small community around the University of Washington because the Instagram handle was called fitted.uw. Yeah. And then eventually, over about a year and a half, Dylan ends up graduating. He leaves UW, but Fitted still kind of remains as this group of like 7 to 10 college students. And they're all bound together by this interest in fashion and expressing themselves. And so one of them ends up making TikToks. And that's sort of the next step of the evolution of what Fitted turns into. We end up growing to a few thousand followers. We start having this like small little virality feeling around University of Washington. And it was kind of interesting because it gave us a little bit of like a cultural say into like what was important and what students should be caring about. But it was still really, nascent and really small and like evolving. You want to go next? And so fast forward from that point on all the way up until where we're at now, Fitted, I had the pleasure of directing for my senior year as a sole director. So last year. And Fitted really spans across many different projects, as you can see, hopefully in front of you guys. Now we have a publication. We've done a fashion show, spatial design. We've made a few different films, branding, photo shoots. You want to go next? We've gotten to garment design, product design, flea markets. I think you kind of get the gist. There's so many projects that I'd love to talk about. We just like don't have enough time. So I think it could be more interesting to sort of understand the through line between all this work and sort of the thought process that's gone into the evolution. And I'd like to propose that as a way to understand really the power of design as we view it, to get different cultures talking and to sort of spark different relationships between the players that already exist and hopefully change the way that we perceive what is possible, especially in Seattle and from a young age. So I'd like to start that through line by talking about university. For many of us, university, unless we have a passion, is just sort of the next logical step in progression for us. We go to this space, and ideally, we should. This is sort of a hypothesis, but individuals arrive at university with some sort of like emergent life force, some sort of a direction of, what do I want to do in my life? But that's pretty underexplored unless you have your direct passion. And so ideally, university should help me answer the question. Oh, you want to go back? University should help me answer the question of like, how do I uniquely mesh with the world? That's almost like an existential level question. And to answer that, it's like a really like hard thing. You need really nuanced, subtle, qualitative, and most importantly, context dependent values. And the truth is, you want to go next? University just doesn't like support that for what it currently is. And it's just the reality. It exists in an environment that's dictated by capitalistic forces in which you kind of have to quantify and prove what you're building for students and being able to spit that back in an outcome, a tangible outcome. And so it's pretty clear once you enter university that you realize that the institution is sort of designed to treat your latent curiosities or energy as more of a resource to be processed and to sort of make you a marker point as to, hey, like we got you this job, we got you progressing onwards onto your career, which seems like relatively a good thing. But in this sort of environment, there exists different nodes, and sort of building on what we just touched, there's internships, competitive majors, and even social hierarchies that you sort of have to apply to get into. These are just ways of like putting a binary effect onto like, are you progressing or are you not? And these are really socially powerful by design because, again, they take away that space that is needed to actually explore. What I've defined to you is kind of common sense if you went through university eventually, and it can sound kind of like matrixy and kind of hand wavy, like what are we actually supposed to do about it? But to add on to that, I'd like to talk about Seattle really quick, especially since it's the site that UW and that we sit in. It's kind of provocative to say, and it kind of feels wrong to say at like such a beautiful space, but I'd argue that Seattle feels kind of creatively dead, especially from like the ground level. It at least for in college, it feels like it's very hard to get your ideas off, especially at UW, where the majority of kids are studying engineering, CS, business, or some sort of pre-med track. That makes up about like 55% of the student population. And those career outcomes are really like strictly defined. And as we were working on the book and different projects, and we were talking to like different artistic practices and studios in Seattle, we realized just the effect that, you know, tech dominance has. And after the COVID pandemic, so many practices had to move out down to Portland just because rent was getting too high. The Seattle International Film Festival operates at a yearly loss. It's just really hard to get people engaged in the art scene. Packer Theater at the Seattle Pacific Science Center just got shut down to all feature films, which is our only full format IMAX theater, which is like, it's pretty sad as someone growing up in Seattle. And so I'd argue that there's a lot of work to be done to sort of develop some sort of infrastructure that can allow us to change it. And so this is where we get into the architecture part of this talk. And so what is that thought process, and what's the through line that we can use as a way to change the environment? And this is where at the beginning of the year, I sort of treated Fitted and the group of 40 students as a building that we were making. And the context and the environment and the building that we erect can sort of be in dialogue and conversation. And by changing different facets and features of the 40 individuals and the way that we interact with each other, we can also have a dialogue with the environment and hopefully shift it. And yeah, these are just a few of my references that I had at the beginning of the year. I was really inspired by Rem Koolhaas and OMA and sort of like the cultural think tank that they have, and the way that they break up culture as to different parts of the same game, and sort of like shifting how the different parts relate to each other by introducing an object or a design or an experience and something like that. Or Virgil Abloh, young architects can change the world by not building buildings. It's provocative, of course. Architecture relates to the built environment, but I think that there's a lot to be said about the thought process that goes forward. And so when we're talking about architecture, I think it might be helpful to define this down into something a little bit less abstract. I'm referring less to specific and repeatable methods and processes that I could sort of hand out to you, but more so to a form of design that's in dialogue with its own history through applying critique. Now that's still kind of abstract. So let's take this back to the Instagram and the TikToks that sort of blew us up. So when I started thinking about what I wanted to do with Fitted for the year, that Instagram, the TikTok, the virality that happened out of that was really sort of like a hole in my brain. I didn't want to dumb it down to just like, oh, it's clout chasing or virality, or people liked it because they just thought it was cool. And so after a lot of conversation and like talking to people, I was able to come to like a fairly steady hypotheses. But it was like, for the average student at the University of Washington, it's winter quarter, you're going to your 8 a.m. class, and it's the middle of like, let's say, the Seattle freeze. And it's just like, you have no energy to actually care about what outfit you're putting on, or like you don't want to express yourself through fashion. And so I view these TikToks and these Instagrams as sort of like this enabling force, or this factor in this environment that Fitted was introducing, that actually gave students the ability to tap back into that natural form of expression. And I think that understanding that was really helpful to understand what we wanted to do going forward. Another example is junior year, so my third year, right before I took over, we ended up exploring a little bit more outside of fashion, and we got into specifically photo shoots and editorial shoots. And I thought that they were really technically sound and really cool. But whenever I talked to like my more, I'd say like traditionally non-creative friends, they'd say that Fitted feels like almost trapped in the level of pretension, or that it just feels like a fashion club on campus. And that felt pretty disconnected from what I thought it could be. And so it took that level of absorbing that critique. And then for our next year, it was a full focus on multidisciplinary, because the overall problem that we're trying to solve of this creative scene in Seattle is too big to just solve with one discipline. And the more that we can enlist different disciplines like design, film, events, and garment design and fashion, and all these different tools that we have, the better chance that we have at solving the initial problem. And just lastly, and probably my favorite part, and the part that I'm still getting better at, it's imprinting a level of critical thinking on the final tangible outcome or the product that speaks for itself, and that it can enlist all these layers of critical thinking that went into it without me having to stand up here and give you the whole spiel of context before you interact with it. Eventually, I'd love for these objects to just get to their own like, stratosphere, but we're still getting there. And so we have this group of 40 members, and for the whole year that I was the unofficial president, everyone would always tell me that fitted is like really confusing, or it's really abstract, or it's like it doesn't necessarily make sense. And that's like one of the hardest things that I've tried to relay over to people, is that it's actually disassociated sort of by design, and that ambiguity, in my opinion, adds a lot of value. At least in university, everything's sort of like fed to you on a platter, whether it's on social media or whether it's in class or whether it's for your career. And so I think any sort of ambiguous response that you give out to people actually elicits a response from themselves, and it takes a lot of work for them to actually understand like what's going on. So one, on a cultural level, ambiguity has a lot of value. But number two, it has a lot of value for our members itself. It gives us the ability to pursue ideas that are outside of this box of what Fitted should be, which is like a fashion club. And if we can stay dissociated, we can stay pursuing individual ideas and stay like really just pushing the limit. So if one member has an idea, they can push it through 8 different people in the club, who one might be a cinematographer, one might be a graphic designer, one might be an editor, and one might be a costume designer. And all of a sudden you have this whole team that can help you finish your idea. But still, a lot of this is hand wavy. So we needed some way to describe and put a square around like this whole orb of creative energy. And that's where these 2 projects that you're going to interact with right now came from, which is the book, which Sarah's going to talk a little bit more about, and then the fashion show, which Maria's going to talk a little bit about. And yeah, I'll let them get started off that.
Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'm going to kind of talk about and walk you guys through the Ways of Working book, which Fitted produced over the course of the last year. So you guys should have some copies that were on your seats. If you don't have one and you want to look through, we have some extras up here at the front. If you feel free to follow along, I've outlined some pages. It might be kind of hard to see, but we start in the very beginning, just on page 1, and then from 15 to 46 as just kind of like a timeline of Fitted in its beginnings. So the Ways of Working book originally was just for cataloging Fitted in a way and walking through its development and changes from its creation. And by cataloging it, it sort of ended up being this timeline of Fitted through its progression through invisible architecture. So you can see how it started very digitally, as Rishi talked about, and also did start in this phase of pretension and people not really understanding what it was. So by making the book and kind of just recording it, we were able to redefine it in a way and use its limitlessness as part of its definition. So there's also, if you go later in the book, once you're looking through the beginning, on pages 105, 125, and 161, we have some features of members in the club. And this was a big part about the book, was featuring people that were involved in Fitted and placing them either beside or in front of their actual creations. So it was very focused on the people that were present in the club and are creating within the club. In this way, we're kind of focusing on the people that are creating the work, and it's less focused on making art for a specific audience and catering to a specific audience. You can also see in parts of the collection, which Maria will talk about a little bit later, on 129 and 192 and 194, as well as 199 to 206. Those, Maria will talk about that a little bit later. But just as a whole, the book was really for also redefining it in a way that could be an introduction to people that were interacting with the club for the first time. So specifically focusing on people coming to UW, getting introduced to the club, not really understanding what it is. Now the book sort of serves as a more defined like introduction to what the club is and how it operates under like these new architectural like guidelines. And also a big part of it was that the book wasn't for sale, so we made it specifically not for profit. When we handed them out, we had it as like an exchange for donating 2 cans to a food drive. So that was a big like part of the book at its core, was making it not something that was sold and rather something that everybody in the community could enjoy and get to know.
Thank you so much. All right. So the fashion collection was kind of born initially out of an idea to do merch for the club. So back in September, we kind of got together and decided to talk about producing a merch line that people could purchase, and addition to merch line, creating some pieces that people could buy that were more unique, abstract, kind of a little bit high fashion. And this is where we slowly started to see our progress slow down. Over the fall months, we kind of realized that by aiming to produce pieces for purchase and consumption, we were kind of limiting ourselves creatively, essentially. So we had issues with manufacturing, pattern designing, getting everybody together to put out a full collection so people could buy it in the span of 7 months is a really, really hard thing to do. And what initially was a roadblock kind of became a motivator for us. We realized that we didn't have to necessarily aim to produce things for, financial gain. We didn't really have to create clothes that people would go out and buy and we would get a profit. We said, screw it. We're just going to design what we think is cool, and then we're going to see where that goes. And so it was a really fluid process. A lot of days, nights, kind of scheming, planning. And the big thing that kind of all 3 of us noted on is that there wasn't really any traditional sort of gain from it. So we didn't make any money off of the clothes. We didn't make any money off of the collection runway and the design of the runway. It was pretty much a net loss all the way. And as a result, it kind of gave us freedom to do whatever we wanted. So we weren't really looking to appeal to anyone or have things be bought. We were just kind of going at it. And I think that's kind of the main theme that we've taken away from this year, is that you don't necessarily have to find traditional gain from artistic endeavors. Sometimes it's better to not and to fail because it gives you more freedom along the road. And kind of this whole idea that introspective creation in the long run is better than reception-focused creation. If you're always aiming to appeal to someone, to sell someone something, you're never really being true to yourself and to your true design process. And so it was kind of really helpful to remember that at the end of the day, you can do something for yourself, for the people in your club, and you might not make any money doing it, but you'll have fun. And then, do you want to talk about where you see Fitted in the future?
Yeah, me and Maria both also wanted, just to talk about how we see Fitted evolving in the future as well. I think continuing an emphasis really on the people in the club, as we kind of focused on in the book. So like within keeping it very fluid is a big part of how it will stay the same, if that makes sense. So it will change in the future depending on who's in the club, what their interests are, how they operate, and how they develop art. So yeah, by including that sort of fluidity in what Fitted is in the future, it will in that way stay the same, even as it continues to evolve.
Yeah, and I think a big underlying point of invisible architecture is that what we necessarily see Fitted as today is not what it will be tomorrow. So 5 years, 10 years down the line, it could be a completely different club, completely different set of goals, what people want to achieve. And there's a beauty in that because we don't set like a hard and fast structure. Here's our president, here's our VP, here's our secretary. This is how everything runs. It's very fluid. And so because of that, you get people who you wouldn't really normally see in a design setting. I'm not a designer by trade. You're
journalist.
Yeah. So none of us are really centered in design in terms of our careers, but we still find a passion in it. And so I think that's the beauty of Fitted, is that it's very fluid. And yeah, all these books are free. There are stickers as well. Do you have any final closing words to say? No? Thank you so much for showing up, guys. Hope you enjoyed it.